Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next hour, we're going to be running through all the business news stories you need to know about from across Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So the e-commerce giant Naspers did list its internet holdings as a separate company in Amsterdam today. Prosus, as it's known, had a very solid market debut. NEC shares at the JSE up over 28% so far in the year. Prosus actually debuted by over 30% higher in early trading. Over in East Africa, legislators have started debating one of two bills that aims to deal with a credit-killing rate cap. This particular one, though, does want to keep it. Broadly, bank shares didn't really respond that much. Equity Bank up at 0.13%. KCB Bank up by 0.25%. Here's what's coming up tonight. Scores of Nigerians airlifted from Nigeria after deadly attacks on African nationals. American and Nigerian investigators arrest 300 internet scammers. And China has exempted 16 American products from additional tariffs. All right, then, quite a bit to get through in the next hour. So let's start in South Africa, where the Nigerian government has now started to repatriate more than 600 of its citizens following a wave of deadly xenophobic attacks. Private Nigerian carrier Air Peace flew out the first batch of Nigerians earlier today. The plane is expected to land in Lagos, the commercial capital, in a matter of hours. The second flight is expected to depart later on this week. Roughly 640 Nigerians are set to leave South Africa. All right, then, so let's bring you the latest on this story. CGTN's Phil Ihaza joins us live from Abuja. So, Phil, let's just get this clear. Assuming this was a major concern for the state, which, based on all the statements we're getting from government, it seems it is, why didn't it charter a plane directly to evacuate its citizens sooner? Why wait until a privately owned carrier volunteered to do it?
Oh, thank you, Ramah. Well, if you recall, I mean, at the time when the offer from the Nigerian airline operator, private operator, which is one of the leading operators in Nigeria, Air Peace, made that offer. At that time, the federal government was still, looking for, in talks with its officials in South Africa. That's, for example, the ambassador in South Africa. At the time, the Nigeria's president has also sent a special envoy to South Africa to get more details, probe exactly what was on ground, and get facts on how to intervene directly in that matter. So I would not like to see it as the government not being able or not willing to evacuate its citizens, but I'll see it as, because at that time there were several people, private bodies, elder statesmen and Nigerians concerned about the issue, and they were also doing that in different forms. So it was a gesture, a philanthropic exercise by the Nigerian airline operator to step in at the time. And if I would want to believe as a responsibility of the government, they would have still done that in terms of getting an aircraft to evacuate its citizens, whether or not that offer was made.
Right. So what about the costs involved here? Because those, as I understand it, those being evacuated from South Africa aren't paying anything. But is Air Peace footing the bill for this entire process by itself, or is it splitting the cost with the federal government?
Well, according to the statement from the owner or the chairman of the airline operator Air Peace, that's Alan Oyema, he stated this categorically and emphatically last week, saying that for no reason should any expense or cost be put on the travelers, on the Nigerians being evacuated or repatriated. He said that the entire expense of that trip was solely a responsibility of the airline operator. He went further to say that in the incident that any report was given that any of the Nigerians had to pay any cost whatsoever, bear any cost whatsoever to maybe agents of the airline or government officials, that the airline was ready to refund and probe that report. So it is a 100% philanthropic exercise from the airline. There's no sharing whatsoever that we are aware of, according to the statement from the chairman of the airline.
Right, one last question for you. So Nigeria's president is due in South Africa next month, and given the recurrence of these events, we saw something similar in 2008 and again in 2015 and now in 2019, 4 years later. What does he want South African authorities to do in order to make sure this never happens again?
It's a state visit, and it's also one that the president is looking to further discuss the issues of xenophobic attacks or sporadic attacks on foreign nationals, especially Nigeria, living in South Africa. You'd recall that on the sidelines of the conference in Japan just last month, the president had started talks with his counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, on these same issues, xenophobia. This is not an issue that is just started. It's been recurrent for several years, from 2008 up till date, and many Nigerians have lost their lives, properties valued in millions of dollars, and the president will be seeking to to explore some form of collaborations, because as stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, he also said that the country will be demanding compensation for affected victims, and also specifically they would want to know how the Nigerians can send security operatives to South Africa to form some sort of alliance to see how this can be tackled, maybe explain better how Nigerians are dealt with, maybe exchange information, security-wise intelligence information. So these are some of the things that were included in a proposal that the Minister of Foreign Affairs exchanged with the South African ambassador to Nigeria last week during the spate of attacks in South Africa. Also, that meeting is expected to happen in October, and the president will be looking at how these diplomatic tensions can also be doused, because South Africa and Nigeria are two of Africa's top economic giants.
Indeed. Let's see how all of this does play out. Philly Hazard with a view from Abuja. Thank you. Now, on to South Africa. Recently displaced foreign nationals from the waves of xenophobic attacks we've just been talking about have found temporary shelter. Just last week, Africa's most industrialized nation erupted into a frenzy of violence after a wave of xenophobic attacks took two particular cities, Pretoria and Johannesburg, by storm. CGTN's Angelo Coppola now explores how those who've been displaced are looking to rebuild themselves.
The two halls in Katlehong currently house about 800 displaced foreign nationals, including 227 children. One houses Mozambicans and the other Zimbabweans and Malawians. Many escaped by running away from their attackers, but not everyone got away.
Isaac is my friend. He was burnt there by Holomisa. I was with him by the time when he ran away from these guys, and then he got crossfire to those people and got caught, and they beat him and fired him. And he left a young baby, they're 6 weeks old, and the mother. So anyone with the help can help there.
Despite this latest bout of xenophobia, some people feel that they don't have a choice.
It's the same. If you go home, you see Zimbabwe is tough. So it's better to stay here. They'll find something to do or change the place.
Others are seeing their families return home safely. They have chosen to stay in South Africa for the meantime.
Because we still have some things that is still left. Though they have damaged a lot of our things, but at the same time, the little ones we have, we still have to maybe sell it or see what we can do about it.
The community and local authorities have come to the aid of the foreign nationals in the Katlehong area. Community leaders have also stepped up to help where they can.
I moved my family to Mozambique because I say no, just go. As the same I'm going to do with others. Let me just stay. I can't move. Not because I don't have a transport or money. I say no. I was supposed to move with my family. I say I can't. As long as these people is inside here, I can't let them down.
Everyone has lost almost everything they had besides the clothes on their backs. Hopefully they can rebuild their lives, either in South Africa or back home. The choice generally is going to be theirs. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Katlehong, South Africa.
Two Zimbabwe nationals are among those who've been killed in the ongoing xenophobic violence in South Africa. This was formally confirmed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which plans to repatriate the remains of the deceased, along with hundreds of others who've requested assistance to go back home.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the Zimbabwean embassy in South Africa has received requests from about 171 nationals who want to escape the violence and come back home. It says it's in the process of urgently sorting out their repatriation, but will continue monitoring the situation in case it escalates and more Zimbabweans require evacuation. It is estimated there are between 2 and 3 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa, some of them there illegally, and many of them engaged in informal trade and low-level jobs. The last time there was a flare-up of violence in 2015, the government provided a fleet of buses that picked up Zimbabweans from the border who were fleeing the violence. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has joined African leaders in urging South African authorities to swiftly clamp down on perpetrators of the violence. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Right, then let's dig a little deeper into the economic and social drivers of what we've been seeing for the last fortnight or so in South Africa. John Fawcett Pedley is the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School, which is part of the University of Reading. He's live in Johannesburg tonight. Thank you for your time this evening. The violence we've seen has been concentrated in parts of Pretoria, parts of Joburg, but is it likely to have a lasting impact on employment and job creation, especially among SMEs in those cities?
Well, it may do, and one of the reasons it may do, because the president is trying to raise $100 billion in investment, and anything like this damages the reputation of South Africa as an investment destination, and that will, of course, have some effects on economic growth. However, locally, it is very contained, the violence, and in the main business centres, it's not affecting anything at all. So the business carries on, the country keeps growing, and although we have low growth, about 0.6% at the moment, we are moving out of a very difficult period, and there are a lot of initiatives happening in South Africa now to try and do development, to invest in emerging industries, the Internet of Things, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, etc., which are very positive trends for South Africa. But any destabilization like this puts the jitters in people and investors and in local business people, so it's not at all welcome.
Indeed. Is there a sense that perhaps we don't really have a clear picture of what exactly is going on here? Because it's not clear, for instance, exactly how many foreign African nationals we have working and living in South Africa. How many of those are Nigerian nationals? Is part of the problem here that we just don't know exactly what the scale of the problem, quote unquote, really is?
Well, nobody really knows those numbers. That's the trouble. It's estimated between 2 and 3 million Zimbabweans are here, for example. The number of Nigerians is not known. But the truth is that while in some cases, some of the nationals, the people who are coming into the country have very bad reputations for crime and drug dealing, etc., the real truth is that immigrants normally, across the world, contribute to economic growth. They do jobs other people don't want to do. They work very, very hard. They repatriate funds. And they often come with skills and attitudes towards work that are not the same as the people in the local environment. So we have systemic challenges in South Africa anyway with the amount of unemployment. And people who've come from the country into the cities, they desperately need jobs. And some of these are in the sort of middle-age range who have really suffered from the lack of education under apartheid. And it's quite a hopeless situation for them. So of course they see the immigrants and they see them in their shops and in their businesses, and they feel jealous and they feel that they're taking our jobs. It's not really true, because quite often the immigrant communities are actually expanding economies. So our challenge here in South Africa is to do the education, the business development, and create the social stability that's going to allow the country to grow. And that includes trying to get the right statistics and the numbers of immigrants, not only to control them, but also to help people settle and help them develop jobs which will employ and integrate with local businesses.
Correct. South Africa, of course, does import a fair bit of its fuel, the fuel that's consumed in the country, from Nigeria. Does the government expect this to be weaponized, for lack of a better word, in this dispute, if not now, sometime in the future? And if it does get to that point, what are South Africa's alternatives?
Well, we're in a bit of a hole when it comes to oil. I mean, we have one third of our imports of oil come from Nigeria. There are replacements, of course. There are plenty of oil producers in the world, but that takes time. And normally you would have a strategic fuel fund, which is a balance against crises like this. Now, the trouble with that is, under the state capture regime and what happened in South Africa in the last years, that oil was mysteriously and without authority sold off. You know, about 100, I mean, massive amounts of it. And that was done at a much lower cost than the actual spot price of oil, which meant that, and nobody knows really where that money went. So we are left without reserves in South Africa. So we are vulnerable to that. But however, South Africa has recently made gas and oil finds, which are going to make it, with any luck and with a high degree of possibility, a major oil producer in the region. But that doesn't help us with the short-term ends. So yes, we are vulnerable to that. But of course, it's a tricky game to play, is making sanctions between the two major economies in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not a good place to go. This xenophobic violence is truly xenophobic, but Afrophobic rather than foreigners in general. So that's a challenge. And that violence can't be allowed to destabilize long-term dynamics of trade in Africa. We have to manage this in a constructive way. And I have to say, I think everybody is going to, beyond the rhetoric, try to stabilize the relations and manage this well.
Indeed, and that actually brings me neatly to my next question. Quite a few South African companies operating elsewhere in Africa. MTN is in 21 African markets. Shoprite is pretty much across sub-Saharan Africa. And they have faced retaliatory attacks because of what's happened in South Africa. But has this soured companies' views on investing on the continent and the continental free trade area? Or, to use your point, are they looking at the long game?
Look, the thing about Africa, when you watch it, it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. You know, and you can be bipolar in sort of your joyous reaction to the up and your depression about the downsides. But if you look at African statistics over the long term, there is massive improvement in democracy and education and in general GDP growth, etc. So the African long-term trends are very, very positive. Of course, there are major issues to deal with, but there are in any emerging countries. And Africa, the main resource that Africa has is not oil, it's the quality of its people, the quality of the intelligence of its people. And only now in the post-colonial era are people really coming to grips with that within Africa, because we have to decolonize our minds, as Steve Biko would say, but also internationally. What we're starting to see now is people emerging from African countries into the world employment market and doing exceptionally well. So yes, these short-term challenges and the sanctions, the attacks are problematic, but Africa has always been like that, as any turbulent emerging country is. In the long term, Africa holds enormous potential, enormous future, has a massive number of potential youth. We have to work together to get that right. Now, investors can really help. Instead of investing for short-term ends, the wise investors invest into countries for the long term and help produce the talent and the education. They get committed to that, and they're not forgotten. So if China and other countries come into South Africa, instead of trying to make a quick buck, invest in the basic infrastructure, they will have lifelong friends and will benefit in the long term.
Right, then John Foster Pedley from the Henley Business School. Thank you for your input tonight. Let's run now through some company headlines. All right, then, let's run through some company headlines for you, starting with some listed companies. The newly listed unit of Africa's largest company by market value, Naspers, got a very enthusiastic response from investors in Amsterdam. On Wednesday, the unit soared on its Dutch trading debut to close a valuation discount to its biggest investor, or rather its biggest asset, China's Tencent. Prosus, as a new Amsterdam-listed component is called, jumped by as much as 32% in early trading to value the business at $138 billion. In the meantime, the share price of Grand Parade's investment, which holds the master franchises of South Africa's Burger King, is on track to close at a one-month high. Grand Parade's latest share surge comes after the group announced that its headline earnings per share could rise by as much as 190% in the year to end June. Over in Kenya, unionizable bank management and employees are set to enjoy a 6% salary increment, as well as an enhanced medical cover in a 3-year period through to 2021. The move is a successful result of negotiations between the East African nations Banking, Insurance and Finance Union, together with representatives from the Kenya Bankers Association. And finally, following the resignation of Hiroto Saikawa after a scandal of pay, Nissan says it's looking at a pool of about 10 candidates for the top job. Saikawa's departure is the latest upheaval over governance issues for the troubled Japanese carmaker. Right now, Nissan is looking at ways of right-sizing itself in the wake of Carlos Ghosn's dramatic arrest and subsequent ouster last November. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 20 minutes into the hour, time for a break. Here's what's coming up next. American and Nigerian investigators arrest 300 Nigerian internet scammers. And Zimbabwe's finance minister has set up a 9-member monetary policy committee. But will this restore confidence? We'll explore that next.
As we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's talk about something that all of us at one point or another might have seen at one point in time. You know those emails that come into your inbox and they say, I'm a Nigerian prince, I've got X amount of money, I would like to give it to you, but all you have to do is just provide a small deposit of $5,000, right? You've seen those before. Well, some of those guys are behind bars now. A global crackdown on cybercrime has led to the arrest of nearly 300 people, mostly in two countries, Nigeria and the United States. It's a 4-month operation aimed at stopping the so-called business email compromise schemes. And in the last year alone, that sort of behavior led to worldwide losses of over $1.3 billion. With the details, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
We have also recovered from the arrested fraudsters the sum of $169,850 United States dollars, as well as the sum of 92 million naira.
The EFCC's latest account of its joint operation with FBI to root out internet fraudsters. This comes barely a month after the launch of their joint operation tagged Operation Rewire. The operation resulted in the seizures of exotic cars and landed properties. Several people have also been arrested.
The collaborative Operation Rewired, coordinated by the EFCC in Nigeria as an impetus to our sustained operation on perpetrators of various computer-related frauds, have resulted in the arrest of 167 Nigerians for alleged computer-related frauds.
The FBI is also collaborating with several other countries to root out perpetrators of cybercrime, which has swiftly become a widespread problem targeting millions of people.
The IC3, that's our global reporting internet fraud body, IC3 received 20,373 BEC, business email compromise complaints with losses of over more than $1.2 billion. The global goal of this operation is to send a message to all who participate in the BEC scheme that they will be caught and persecuted regardless of where they are located.
A total 281 persons have been arrested worldwide following coordinated international operations targeting individuals in the business email compromise scheme. Nigeria has the largest of 167. Total seizures worth about $3.7 million have also been made, and efforts are ongoing to clamp down on more culprits and prosecute them. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Over in East Africa, Kenyans apparently are least concerned about the security of the personal data that they put out online. A report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development says only 4 out of every 10 internet users in the East African economy are concerned about their privacy online. That's the lowest level around the world. Experts are now warning that this leaves individuals like you and me wide open to cyber attacks. CGTN's Robert Nagila has that report.
Tony Opan uses the internet regularly for work, but also to access social networks.
Yeah, I'm quite active.
Opan says a few years back, he would readily share his personal details on social networks.
The first time I joined Facebook, I think it was back in 2012. I did share my details. It was my phone number with someone whom I didn't know.
He soon realized his mistake when the individual in question began stalking him. A report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development says just 4 out of 10 internet users in Kenya are concerned about online privacy, against a global average of 8 out of 10 internet users.
I am not surprised.
Richard Mudhoa, an executive at Internet Solutions, a Nairobi-based IT firm, says all one needs on the internet to harm you is your name, email address, and phone number.
I do not believe people understand the value of their personal data. Give me a combination of those 3 details, then there's a lot more that I can do that can really harm you.
And he warns internet users must be cautious when using free Wi-Fi.
Because most of these hackers sit behind these public Wi-Fis.
But it's not just individuals who are targeted. Businesses too are increasingly under pressure. In the first 3 months of this year, there were more than 11 million cyber threats to Kenyan firms, a 10% increase from last year. In 2018, cybersecurity attacks cost the economy $295 million, a 39% increase from the previous year. To counter these threats, Internet Solutions has set up a Cyber Threat Intelligence Center to help companies fight off cyber attacks.
As you can see, this is real time. For every second that I speak right now, there's an attack that is happening from country to country, and no country is an exception.
As yet, Kenya does not have a data protection law, leaving many suspicious of the government's data collection efforts in recent months. Back at the internet cafe, after his stalking experience, Tony is now more careful with what he shares online.
With the recent terror attacks and the recent cyber crimes, I have decided not to be sharing them again.
And experts are urging the public to verify any websites they intend to carry out any financial transactions and avoid providing personal details on any social networks altogether. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Zimbabwe's finance minister has set up a monetary policy committee in his latest attempt to stabilize an economy that's been in free fall for years. Professor Mtulinkube named a 9-member panel made up of academics, bankers, as well as the governor and his 2 deputies to the nation's central bank's monetary policy committee. This is essentially a step forward as far as the government is concerned towards setting up a benchmark interest rate and then introducing a monetary policy that's based around inflation targeting. The professor suspended the release of annual inflation statistics until February, but economists estimate that the inflation rate is anywhere between 230% to 570%. The introduction of the MPC ideally should help with oversight of the central bank, but its mandate is still yet a tad unclear. Now, we're still getting a lot more reactions to Nigeria's latest GDP data. According to the country's statistics bureau, Nigeria's economy grew by 1.94% in real terms. That's 16 basis points less than the 2.1% recorded in the first quarter. Analysts, however, say the figure is pretty disappointing and it shows a lot more must be done. Here's CGTN's Dirty Badmus with more.
To get a sense of how disappointing Nigeria's second quarter GDP growth rate is, you need to look at the country's 2019 budget projection. Authorities had forecast a 3.01% GDP growth rate. But if this second quarter GDP result is anything to go by, that forecast will sure be wide off the mark.
I'm really worried and worried that if we continue at this rate of growth, we might not even be able to do 2%. It's not a good thing for the economy. I mean, just putting it straight. And those who want to invest in Nigeria might also be worried or bothered as to the kind of growth that we have this moment today.
But the IMF and World Bank projected 2.1% growth for Nigeria this year. But the second quarter growth rate suggests the government needs to work much harder to even achieve those targets. And what's even more worrying to some experts is the possible implication of the second quarter GDP figure on jobs.
The sector that drive employment are either in negative territory or slowing down. I mean, the manufacturing sector that contracted by 0.13%. The manufacturing sector is a major employer of labor. The trade sector, which also contracts, is a major employer of labor. The construction industry is a major employer of labor. The real estate sector is a major employer of labor. So these are sectors that actually create the jobs. So if they are in contraction mode or have gone into the negative territory, then you can also recognize why the level of employment may continue to increase.
Nigeria's current unemployment rate is put at 23.1%. That figure is likely to go up by the end of the year. Authorities face a very daunting challenge to address the problem in a country where the population growth continues to outstrip economic growth.
We need to make policy that will put money in people's pockets, and the people will spend their way from individual recession nature to a national economic prosperity. We need growth that is not less than 7% for us to say that we are growing desirably. And this growth must not be jobless. What that means is for us to have growth that is job inclusive, it must not be necessarily driven by oil. It must be driven by non-oil sector, because that is where the jobs are.
Nigeria's economy is still very much an oil-driven one. The GDP figures clearly show that, and this is despite the current efforts of the government at diversifying the economy. So one thing is clear, the country must continue to hope that everything holds in its oil industry and that global oil prices either go up or do not go below their current level. Anything to the contrary could have a devastating consequence on this economy. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos.
Bit of industry news now. Kenya's hosted the second annual International Industrial Expo in its capital, Nairobi. The event was organized by several parties, Fabrication Expo Kenya and the China Information and Culture and Communication outfit, with the support of the Kenya Investment Authority. The event was the second of its kind. CGTN's Alexander Majala was there.
The event attracted almost 100 Chinese manufacturing firms from China's Shandong province. It is inspired by the need to support the 4 pillars in Kenya's development agenda. The Big Four agenda, unveiled by President Uhuru Kenyatta in December 2017, includes manufacturing, affordable housing, universal health coverage, and food security. While Kenyan manufacturers were not present, they were represented by umbrella bodies and government representatives.
These umbrella bodies are the ones that protect and promote the interests of the Kenyan companies, the Kenyan manufacturers. They are the ones who push in, be it bills, be it projects, be it funding. All the manufacturers, they merge to form an association which will represent them, especially equally, so that all associations get these kind of advantages.
The Kenyan government is seeking to explore the untapped potential of its manufacturing sector to create employment and wealth. It aims to increase its contribution to the GDP by at least 10% per year. But there are still hurdles to overcome.
These kind of expos also form like a foundation for linkages with investors. We also want investors here because the greatest challenge that we have in the manufacturing industry is the technology. And also, just to have the know-how of how things are done.
This industrial expo is meant to boost Kenya's manufacturing capacity and help the country meet international manufacturing standards. It's also expected to attract almost 1,000 visitors. China is renowned globally for its manufacturing sector with iron, steel, aluminium, textiles, cement, chemicals, toys, electronics, rail cars, ships and aircrafts leading the charge. As of 2017, the country's manufacturing sector contributed 40.5% to China's GDP.
Maybe for our manufacturer, we need more advertising for us and in Kenya, because that's our first time and we don't have customers before in here, and maybe the better tax that can give us more competitive price for us to come into this market, to this country.
As you know, as the first time for us to Kenya, we want to enter the market, the building material market in Africa. Kenya as the first stop for us. We believe that Kenya must be a good market for building material. Our China government inspire us to enter the African market.
Manufacturing is a key sector in Kenya's economic development, in both its contribution to national output and exports and for job creation. Key targets and specific goals have been set to steer industrial growth. These include the development of special economic zones, industrial parks and clusters, as well as niche products. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Better commodity news now. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, the two largest producers of cocoa in the world, are set to meet major chocolate makers and cocoa grinders in Abidjan. Now, the meeting is designed to sustainably regulate the efforts to source, process and pay for this commodity. The plans will also help the industry, at least on paper, deal with deforestation and the blight of child labour in the cocoa sector. But there are concerns in the industry that this new move might represent a major and perhaps costly overhaul of the certification schemes that are used to boost brand marketing. The two countries have already imposed a fixed living income differential of $400 a tonne as part of efforts to tackle pervasive farmer poverty and deforestation. You're watching Global Business Africa. We'll be back in 60 seconds with more news from around the world.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run some stories making your headlines at this hour. Scores of Nigerian nationals flew out of South Africa today in the wake of rising xenophobic attacks against fellow Africans. The group of roughly 300 passengers took advantage of a free evacuation offer made by a local operator, Air Peace. The carrier's evacuation plan had been delayed by lack of documentation for the beneficiaries. The Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari announced on Monday that his government had also made arrangements for the immediate voluntary evacuation of Nigerians who want to leave. The body of the former Zimbabwean President Robert Gabriel Mugabe has arrived in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. The chartered jet touched down at an airport named after the country's long-serving leader, Robert Mugabe Airport, on Wednesday afternoon. Thousands of Zimbabweans turned up to witness the arrival. The body was later driven to Mr. Mugabe's Blue Roof mansion in the capital, where it will lie overnight. He will be buried later on Sunday after a state funeral on Saturday. The World Health Organization is calling on donors to fulfill their pledges of funding Ebola response operations. They say so far they've only gotten $45 million out of the required $278 million, and that may not last beyond September. Aid organizations are struggling to contain this deadly disease that has killed more than 2,000 people since August last year. And finally, relatives of victims of the Ethiopian Airlines tragic flight 302 have held an emotional vigil outside the Department of Transportation to mourn their relatives 6 months after the plane crashed into farmland outside the capital, Addis Ababa. The victims' families expressed the challenges they're facing as they try to move on with life without their loved ones. That's a run through your headlines. All right then, let's talk about Brexit now. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says that an orderly departure of the UK from the European Union is still possible. The Chancellor's latest remarks come after several EU countries expressed concerns that the UK could try to boost its economic advantage, relatively speaking, post-Brexit by pursuing a very strong deregulation policy. However, according to Ms. Merkel, the integrity of the EU is too important to sacrifice for the sake of a deal. In the meantime, British Parliament has passed a new law that compels the Prime Minister to delay the country's exit until 2020. But the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who has previously said he would rather be dead in a ditch than delay Brexit, says he will not be requesting an extension.
The EU will in a few months experience the exit of an important member, the exit of Britain. We still have every chance of getting an orderly Brexit. The German government will do everything it can to make that possible, right up to the last day. But I also say we're prepared for a disorderly Brexit.
A renowned independent human rights expert Obiora Okafor is pushing for Qatar to improve living conditions for migrant workers in the country. Qatar has been facing quite a bit of criticism for inadequate legal protections afforded to workers from developing countries. Okafor says a scrapping of obligatory exit visas for most workers and other measures would ultimately improve their conditions. With 92% of the labour force being made up of migrants, protection, especially for female migrant domestic workers, continues to lag behind those of other categories. In October 2017, Qatar introduced a temporary $200 minimum monthly wage that was aimed at boosting the incomes of domestic workers. After a 10-day-long fact-finding mission to Qatar, Okafor is expected to present his report to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva in June 2020.
Many domestic workers continue to work long hours. Some of them have reported up to 16 hours daily with few realistic avenues to protest, despite this being prohibited by the law. Many are denied mobile phones by employers, hindering their access to the outside world. The new temporary national minimum wage is a step in the right direction and should be commended, while steps are taken to instate a higher and non-discriminatory permanent minimum wage.
Right, then on to Apple. It's unveiled new iPhones, new Apple Watches, new iPads. You know, the usual event at its usual annual launch event. CGTN's Wang Guan was there. She filed this report from Silicon Valley.
A faster chip, more battery life, and more color options. Apple has unveiled new models of smartphones, the iPhone 11 for $699, the iPhone 11 Pro selling for $999, and the iPhone 11 Pro Max priced at $1,099. The devices appear similar to the previous models, with the biggest change coming from an enhanced camera system. The triple camera design on the back includes an ultra-wide lens that can capture a panoramic view. The new cameras can also take what Apple described as the highest quality video in a smartphone.
This is the first phone that we've called Pro. And for us, that means it's a device that pros can count on to get their work done. But it's also a product for all of us who want simply the best product made, even if we're not a pro.
The incredible capabilities built into Apple Watch.
Apple has rolled out the next generation Apple Watch Series 5, which starts at $399 and features a new always-on Retina display, and the 7th generation iPad, which is priced at $329 and includes a bigger screen.
A key new feature of this year's iPhone is its enhanced photo-taking and video-taking capabilities. Some industry analysts point out this is partly because of strong competition coming from China.
I believe the emphasis on the camera, first, of course, it's under a lot of pressure from a lot of Chinese vendors who are putting a lot of innovation in the camera technology, imaging technology. At the same time, it's also a pretty good synergy between the other services that Apple wanted to bring into the Apple ecosystem.
In that ecosystem is Apple's new services. The company introduced Apple TV Plus, a new streaming service that could rival Netflix and Hulu, and Arcade, a new gaming service.
These are just a few of the exclusive originals from the exciting Apple TV Plus lineup. With Apple TV Plus, you'll get access to these and so many more, the best movies, comedies, dramas, and kids shows.
Some industry analysts predict that next year will be a big one to watch, as Apple, along with its global competitors, could be launching their first 5G smartphones. Wang Guan, CGTN, Cupertino, California.
All right, then, back into commodity news. If you were looking at oil prices today, there was a really odd dip that came out. Brent crude actually did fall from this point over 2% at 16:06 GMT, hovering around $61 a barrel. One partial driver this time round, news that the US president apparently did consider easing sanctions on Iran. But given all the rhetoric we've seen about a maximum pressure campaign from this administration, not to mention the sheer unpredictability of policy from the White House, you could make the argument that it might be a bit too early to be reacting positively to that bit of information. Here's what's coming up next.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Setting up and running a metal fabrication business is no easy task, especially if the country in question is Nigeria, where a constant, steady, reliable electricity supply is virtually absent and access to credit is extraordinarily tight. It's even tougher when the enterprise in question is a startup. But one metal fabrication startup in Onitsha in southeast Nigeria is braving the odds and making quite a bit of progress. Here's Deji Badmus with that story on Grassroots.
Articulated vehicles serve many purposes, ranging from transporting of goods, construction works, and so much more. In this workshop, men are at work piecing together different parts that make up the body of a truck. Overseeing all the activities here is Chris Onyekwalu, founder of Chris Loy Construction. It's a very laborious task and a work of art. Interestingly, his exploit is not based on any form of formal education in engineering or the likes.
I built trailer body from scratch. I built palletized body. I built tipper body, both trailer and small trucks. I mean 6 tons to 40 tons. I fabricate them from scratch. I bought those things in the market. I do it myself with my bare hand. I don't have machine. I do it with my bare hands.
At the age of 17, Chris dropped out of school to learn metal fabrication. After an apprenticeship that lasted for 6 years and 10 additional years working for his boss, he teamed up with his fellow apprentice to set up their own metal fabrication enterprise. There were just 2 of them at the beginning. The enterprise has now grown into one of the biggest metal fabrication firms in southeast Nigeria.
I started with just one welding machine with one person, which is alloy. We started it together. Then, and at the time, we have an apprentice. From apprentice, we have one workman. Then we started from that moment till now. We are about 9 in number.
Just as we learnt job back then, so many others are now learning under us as apprentices. When they are done, they would go on to set up on their own.
Though their firm has grown bigger since it was set up about 9 years ago, they say they could do even more than they are currently doing if one of their basic challenges can be addressed: electricity.
Sometimes in 3 weeks, you won't find light. And when the month ends, you have to pay. So I find it that it's a waste for me. That's why I run on diesel. And this is the most expensive thing in this work.
From morning till night.
Imagine spending 12,000 every day on diesel alone. When you add that up in a year, it's huge. So we are appealing to the authorities to give us electricity supply. If we had electricity, we wouldn't be spending so much on diesel and repairing generators.
It's a challenge virtually every enterprise in Nigeria, both big and small, are having to deal with, and it's seriously eroding their revenue. As for Chris, to fulfill his dream of acquiring formal education, he has since gone back to school and is now in his 3rd year in the university, studying political science. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Onitsha, southeast Nigeria.
Thousands of South Africans gathered in Soweto recently to celebrate the country's popular street food culture. The Kota Festival is one of several activities taking place across the country during the Heritage Month. CGTN's Julie Shire was there.
Kota Masters pulled out all the stops as more than 10,000 people turned up on the first day of the Kota Festival in South Africa. A kota is a hollowed-out portion of bread stuffed with scrumptious fillings and the nostalgic flavor of home.
It's something that originates from the hood. Yeah, that's why we're celebrating kota, because we grew up eating kota and now it's something so big that we have events on kotas.
They normally put a steak, sometimes a fish, and chips, especially when they've got acha or sauce, extra sauce, then it's nice. I'm looking something different.
Chefs got creative with the offerings from traditional kotas to the more gourmet-style dishes.
Our kota is special because it represents, I feel like it's got the soul of South Africa. I mean, it's not often that you get a kota with liver, and it's not often that you get a kota with inhliziyo, which is heart. So it's sort of like the color of it, like it's got every color there. So it's like a representation of South Africa.
So every time I'm at the location, I always feel left out. I'm like, I want to eat this, but what can I do to change this so that they can introduce something that I can also eat? So I introduce hake. So yeah, basically that's what the reason why I'm here today is to make sure that everyone gets used to the seafood in the location.
Festival goers were undeterred by the snaking queues to get their hands on some Kasi food.
I'm hoping for the best quota because everyone's here, so I'm hoping this is the best one because, you know, where the wind blows, we go.
Quota is a soul food. Actually, we always advise people to come. You must not eat anything when you come to the festival because once you have that quota, then you will be satisfied. Your soul will be good.
Try a little bit. Let us know what it's like.
It's good. Very good.
It's not just an opportunity to showcase delicious township food. It gives small businesses a chance to grow and expand their market. Chilishara, CGTN, Soweto, South Africa.
And finally, as part of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan, the kingdom has now started construction of a massive entertainment park right outside the capital, Riyadh. The park is all part of the oil-rich nation's plan to diversify its economy away from a heavy reliance on fossil fuels and to focus a lot more on culture and recreation in future. Take a look.
If you are impressed by the size and scale of Disneyland or Universal Studios, wait till you see Qiddiya. Backed by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, the $8 billion project will include 28 big entertainment facilities and is expected to break 12 world records. That will include the world's highest, longest, and fastest roller coaster with instant speed as fast as 250 kilometers per hour. The park is located 40 kilometers away from Saudi's capital, Riyadh, and will satisfy the need of locals craving for entertainment.
We have a huge market. Our residents are very enthusiastic about such a theme park. We will build hotels and facilities for the visitors. Our goal is to attract our people back to Saudi Arabia to consume at this park.
80% of entertainment activities of Saudis are happening outside of the country. The decision by Saudis to seek out entertainment venues elsewhere is estimated to cost the kingdom $30 billion a year. This one-of-its-kind theme park is definitely aimed to reverse that. Vision 2030, announced in 2016, and the broader framework that Qiddiya is in, has made culture, tourism, and entertainment as pillar industries. Hundreds of billions of dollars will be poured in to developing theme parks, island tourism, and desert adventures.
We will come up with laws and regulations in this area. We are very confident that our country will show competitive edge in tourism and entertainment industries. We will not only draw our citizens back, but we will lure hordes of tourists from other parts of the Arab world.
Song Yaotian, CGTN.
All right, then let's wrap up with a run through some currencies here for you. So South Africa. South Africa just keeps ducking downgrades over and over and over again. Moody's yet again has decided not to downgrade the country's sovereign debt into junk territory, unlike the other ratings agencies. So a dollar rand rate that spent most of August over 15, now back essentially under the 1470 range. But the news, though, isn't all positive. The business confidence index data out today, nothing short of dismal. The main index is at levels not seen in 34 years. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There's several ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington.